Alright, hey guys, BeardBrigade here, coming at you with a new kind of episode. I mentioned during Series 4 that I wanted to just start doing some videos about, like, crafting mechanics and stories and things like that. Just things with, like, general content creator stuff for games. So this episode was originally going to do it as one giant episode, but actually this time around I decided to, now that I actually am sitting here about to record, I actually decided I'm going to break it up into a couple different episodes. So the first episode, we are going to talk about the history of necromancy in terms of actual the actual history of it. So, I'm talking about that today. While I do so, I figured what better game to do it in than Total War Warhammer. If you're not familiar with Total War games, they are a turn-based / real-time strategy game. When you play the actual campaign game, you pick your faction and you play through on a turn-based board, where you take over provinces and castles and things like that, and you build your armies and you build up your provinces. And then when your armies engage in battle, you have the option to either auto-resolve it, or you can actually take part in the battle, which is where the real-time strategy part comes in, because you actually have to command your army. Rather than play through the campaign part, I went ahead and just decided to do a custom battle. I'm playing as the Vampire Counts with a Necromancer as my army general, with two heroes, a White King and a Banshee, and then a undead army of Graveguard, Skeleton Warriors, some Skeleton Knights, two undead dragons, and a Mortis Engine, which is like a magical undead chariot. And I'm sieging a castle belonging to Bretonnia, which is basically your typical fantasy-themed lords and knights, and Bretonnia is actually very obviously themed after King Arthur and the Knights of the Holy Grail, because you can actually get Grail Knights, and you have Pilgrims, you have the Green Knight, and I mean, if you took French and the British and kind of smashed them together a little bit, in terms of like a high fantasy theme, you kind of get Bretonnia out of it. So I'm sieging one of their castles with my undead army, and I'm using kind of a more veteran army to make it a little bit easier on myself. I went ahead and put it's like a scared one-off noble, even though it's kind of actually a bigger town. I went ahead and themed the Bretonian army after some kind of like scared, quickly thrown together defense force. And I made the level of the town very low. So kind of doing it a little bit cheaply, but I didn't want to have to think too much while I was talking and going through my notes. So I want to be able to focus on giving you guys the information rather than focusing on actually putting the battle. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump in, and we will start. Actually, before we jump into the battle, I want to define necromancy for you guys. So necromancy is, by definition, is a practice of magic involving communication with the deceased, either by summoning their spirit as an apparition or raising them bodily. At which point you would use that for the purpose of divination, imparting the means to foretell future events or discovering hidden knowledge, to bring someone back from the dead. Or to use the deceased as a weapon, as the term may sometimes be used in a general sense to refer to black magic or witchcraft. Now, necromancy goes back a long ways, because the word necromancy is actually adapted from the late Latin word necromantia, spelled Necromantia. And then that word itself is actually broken down from a lot of other compound and ancient Greek words. I won't get into that. If you want to look up more, I found that the wiki page where a bulk of the information in my notes, because they did a good job of summing up a lot of the stuff that I found on Wikipedia. So if you want to look up some more information, look up on the Wikipedia page, the necromancy. Look up the word necromancy. Great article with a bunch of stuff in it. So with that, we will jump into the battle, and we will start with our first section of necromancy and antiquity. So we're talking Rome, ancient Greek, BC era stuff here, guys. So where necromancy began, or early necromancy, could actually be related to, and was actually most likely evolved from ancient shamanism. Now, ancient shamanism called upon spirits such as ghosts or deceased ancestors, which is where this thought of necromancy probably evolved from, naturally. With that, classic necromancers address the dead using a mixture of high-pitched squeaking and low droning noises, which would actually be comparable to, the trance-like state of shamans, of ancient shamans, and even modern shamans, because there's still shamans out there in the world, across the globe. Now, necromancy during this era was very, very prominent in Western antiquity areas, with known records of practice to be found in Egypt, Babylonia, Greece, and even Rome itself. So, that's been around for a long time, guys. This isn't something that was invented as part of, the fantasy genre. This is something that actually legitimately has been a thing since the Greek and Roman eras. In fact, to talk about the oldest reference, so the known oldest literary account of necromancy is actually going to be found in Homer's The Odyssey. I never realized that was actually, I knew when I read this and was looking into it, I knew instantly what they were referring to, but I never realized that, it never really dawned on me how old The Odyssey really was until I read up on this, because I'll read a little bit here about this literary reference. So, under the direction of Circe, a powerful sorceress, Odysseus travels to the underworld in order to gain insight about his impending voyage home. He's trying to do this by raising the spirits of the dead through the use of spells which Circe had taught him. He wishes to invoke and question the state of Tiresias in particular. However, he is unable to summon the spirit without the assistance of others. Now, it does go on to explain how he did these necromantic rituals and rites, and he had to do it at night and around this pit, and he had to sacrifice a bunch of animals to make concoctions and stuff to get the information out of the spirits. Now, the descriptions that it talks about here is actually pretty common, because the practices of doing these rituals at nightly hours and with fire pits and animal sacrifices were a thing, but they didn't necessarily go that far, because some were very mundane, while others got very grotesque, like they were described in the Odyssey. Now, rituals, could be quite elaborate. They would involve creating magic circles, having wands and talismans, as well as using a variety of different incantations. Now, to do this, the necromancer may also surround themselves with morbid aspects of death. And some of the references of some of the things get pretty far out there and verging on the grotesque. Such as this, for example, many rituals included the necromancer wearing the deceased's clothing, while also consuming foods that symbolized lifelessness and decay, such as rotted bread, unfermented grape juice, and things like that. Necromancers would even go as far as to take part of kind of cutting up and eating the body as well. So they would, in order to bring back the spirit of the person that died, they would eat the person's body. Now that's verging on pretty out there. Like that's pretty intense. These ceremonies, these rituals, they could take anywhere from several hours to even up to several weeks, leading up to the eventual summoning of the spirit. Oh crap! I'm getting attacked here already. We like to move it. We like to move it. We like to move it. Sorry guys, I totally a little sidetracked there. Let's send our dragons out here. While our siege towers slowly move in. So, esteem and now, like I said, these would take a very long time. Now, in antiquity, leading up to, AD, there's actually a reference that appears in the Bible that specifically names necromancy specifically, because now because it was referenced in the Bible. It's also referenced in a lot of Jewish writings as well, which I found really interesting. Now, they weren't necessarily, some of them were called necromancers in some of the references, but a lot of the cases they were actually referred to as bone conjurers. And I wanted to read this little excerpt here that came from, I believe it was the Bible itself, actually. So, when thou art come into the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, thou shalt not learn to do according to the abominations of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who maketh his son or his daughter to pass through the fire, or who uses divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch, or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits, or a wizard, and then get this, guys, specifically named out, or a necromancer. For all who do these things are an abomination unto the Lord, and because of these abominations, the Lord thy God doth drive them out before thee. Now, I find this really interesting, and it's going to be... You guys will kind of see the point that I'm going to make here in a minute with this. So, we have this excerpt, basically stating that, if you take part in necromancy, or you're involved with necromancy, or magic, or the beliefs and things of these nations that you come onto, it's an abomination to God. Now, some Christian writers would later reject the idea entirely that humans could even be brought back to life without the assistance of God. So, as well as, he would also reject, because if someone was able to bring back the spirit without the assistance of God, it was considered that they were bringing back a demon. They weren't raising the spirit of the person, they were actually bringing a demon into the world of man, which, would obviously be kind of a big frickin' deal. So, with that, though, I want to bring up this fact before we move into the early and high Middle Ages history here, because in the early and high Middle Ages history, you saw a lot of conversion of cultures and nations and peoples to Christianity, and there was nothing wrong. It was kind of the bee's knees, you could say, during that time. So it was not uncommon at all to see that kind of thing happen. Now, the point that I want to bring up, though, in a lot of the research that I've done for a variety of different things over the years, whether it be to look up source material, or find a reference about something, or get inspiration about how I wanted to write a culture app for a specific fantasy world. One of the things that, to no surprise really, that occurred a lot during this time era, and I found a really cool see, he's over here, so where's this guy? Oh, he's still doing that over here. A really cool podcast called Lore, and actually, guys, if you are interested in lore, not only is it a podcast that you can find on Spotify, by the way, it actually has its own television show now. I think actually it's had its own television show for a while. You can actually find it, I believe, on Amazon Prime. I don't have Amazon Prime, so unfortunately I don't know if that's where it is, but I know it's on Netflix or Hulu, so I don't know, so unfortunately I'm not going to be able to provide a reference to it, unfortunately. But if you happen to find it and you want to share that link with somebody, please do so in the link in the comments below. That way we can show it, because the podcast is awesome, because the guy talks about different myths and legends that we have around the world, and where we get these concepts of them, and he explains the actual real world things that have happened, as well as he talks about like ghost stories and things like that, because the guy's a if I like trade, the guy is a like a writer. He's a horror writer. So the reason I bring this up, because he mentioned in one of his podcasts that I listened to how in ancient times with Christianity, when an area would convert to Christianity, it was not uncommon for them to take the beliefs and meld it in, because they found with early Christianity that completely taking over somebody and then subjecting them and forcing them to believe in your beliefs was a really bad idea. So they would actually take symbols and beliefs and myths and stories and convert them in such a way that they would make them as part of the Christian belief, or if not part of the belief system, they would turn it into, like, you know, what you would consider like the boogeyman. So one of the big things, and I found this to be one of the most interesting ones, was witches. So in ancient times, in Europe and parts of Asia and things like that, a witch was not a bad person. Was not this evil creature that we see now depicted in, you know, movies and, you know, fantasy games and things like that. The word witch actually means good woman, I believe. I could be slightly wrong on it. If someone actually knows that I'm wrong on that, please you give me the actual definition. So yeah, that's the actual supposed definition of witch in terms of its meaning. Now, I think that's really interesting. So, you know, basically, back in the day, it was a good thing to have a witch in town. Now, the reason I bring this up is because when I get into early and high Middle Ages, you guys are going to get shocked about necromancy. I bet you 10 to 1 you're going to be completely shocked about it. So, you know, it wasn't uncommon, you know, to see these, you know, takeovers of cultural beliefs and such. Now, you know, hence, you know, we have now witches being bad people when they weren't bad people. Because in the High Middle Ages, many medieval writers believed, like I mentioned before, that resurrection required the assistance of God. So you couldn't be a necromancer unless God was helping you. So they saw the practice of necromancy as conjuring demons instead. So they would refer to necromancers as devil worshippers and summoning demons, and not actually raising the dead, because you would have to have the power of God to do that. Now, the practice of someone actually bringing someone back from the dead was known as maleficium, or I believe that was actually, no, that's the summoning of demons, maleficium. And the Catholic Church would condemn that. So if you were, you know, trying to raise demons, you were banned by the church. Now, because of all of the necromancers that were out there, and because of the church and being how widespread that it had become by the Middle Ages, necromancers, with all of the references and such of them during this age period, there's actually no solid evidence that they were organized in any way, shape, or fashion. So if you came across a necromancer, it was likely that they were a one-off. So it was just that one person as a necromancer with no real connection to anybody else, or any other necromancer, or any kind of group of necromancers, which I found really interesting. Now, here's where things get spicy. So, during the medieval era, necromancy is believed to actually have been the synthesis of astral magic, which was derived from Arabic influences, as well as the practice of exorcism, which of course came from Christian and Jewish teachings. Now, the Arabic influences are evident in the rituals that are recorded, involving different phases of the moon, the placement of the sun, the time of day, what day of the week it was, and and fumigation and the act of burying images are also found both in astromagic and necromancy. Now, furthermore, Christian and Jewish symbols are found prevalent in the conjuration formulas used in the different summoning rituals by a necromancer. So, which leads us into the next part, where you're probably going to sit there and go, what? I guess we should end battle. Oh, it's going to end it here, right? Oh, because there's still guys on the field. Ha ha ha. So, practitioners of necromancy were often members of the Christian clergy during the Middle Ages. I'm going to say that one more time for you guys so it sinks in. Practitioners of necromancy were often members of the Christian clergy. Though some non-clerical practitioners are recorded during the Middle Ages, the bulk of them that are in recorded history are members of the church. So, to further explain this, many of them were connected by a belief in the manipulation of spiritual beings, especially demons, as well as other magical practices. Now, these practitioners are almost always literate and well educated. Most possessed basic knowledge of exorcism and had access to texts such as astrology and that of demonology. Clerical training was informal, and university-based education was often rare. Now, most were trained under apprenticeships and were expected to have a basic knowledge of Latin, ritual, and doctrine. This education was not always linked to spiritual guidance, and seminaries were often non-existent. This situation allowed some aspiring clerics to combine Christian rites with occult practices, despite it being condemned in Christian doctrine. So, because of the fact that they were able to do everything in tandem together, they could get away with it. So they weren't necessarily... let's do an ambush. Yeah, let's do an ambush. Ambush sounds fun, doesn't it? No, I want to... There we go. Now, during the medieval times, practitioners, not too undifferent than those of antiquity, were trying to accomplish one of three things. The manipulation of a person or creature's will by the use of demons, or to influence them in one way or another towards a particular path. Illusions, by either reanimating the corpse of the person that's dead, conjuring up food, entertainment, or even modes of transportation, or the seeking knowledge, to learn from the deceased, from the dead, to either help put away criminals or, determine the future. Now, that's not too undifferent than antiquity, because they were using necromancy and antiquity to find answers. Like Odysseus, he was trying to find out how his journey was going to go. So he went out to do this necromantic ritual to try and get information about what would happen. Now, I think that's super interesting to do that. He wanted information. Now let's go against the Empire this time, shall we? Now, before we move into the late Middle Ages here, I want to bring up two things. Yeah, two things. First thing I'm going to bring up, so those who were condemned by the church of performing necromancy, it was rare to see these confessions in recorded history, apparently. There's not too many of them out there. Now, those who were accused of necromancy suggest there was a range of spell and casting and related magical experiments for their research of necromancy, or their practice of necromancy. Now, unfortunately, because of these, because of where I'm not sure if it, I didn't really note down specifically why this is, but apparently by researchers it's difficult to determine whether those details are true about their practices as opposed to the whims of their interrogators. So it's unsure whether the folks, let's do a ghoul army. Yeah, let's do a ghoul army. So it's unknown whether or not that information, that was achieved from the interrogators was legit, or did they actually get an interrogation, like confession, with that, or did the interrogators just say that that's what happened? I think that's a really interesting concept. For that, like, oh, did they actually pull it off, or are they just pulling our leg? Let's see, let's go. Broncos in here. No. Our guys in here. I'm just making a trashy army here. Let's see, what else can I throw in here that would be kind of ghoulish? Try to make a ghoul army here. I guess we could just throw in some fell bats for distraction. Let's see. So I got a general of the Empire. I won't give him any heroes. We'll give him a small force too. We'll give him a couple spearmen. Now, I think that was really interesting. Now, here's one thing I want to bring up before. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, that's fine. I'll give him a couple militiamen. Alright, that should be good. Again, I don't want to make it too overly where I have to think. So, the other thing I want to bring up real quick. So, the act of performing medieval necromancy usually involved magical circles, conjurations, and sacrifices, such as those shown in the book, The Munich Manual of Demonic Magic. Now, this book has a wide variety of things written in it to explain how to perform necromantic rituals. Now, the reason I want to bring this up is because leading into the late Middle Ages, as well as the early Renaissance era, due to the inconsistencies of those confessions, and of the inconsistency by the church to actually condemn people for performing necromancy, the practice of necromancy, as well as the practice of other magics, were able to utilize spells featuring holy names with impunity. Now, as any biblical references in such rituals could be construed as prayers rather than spells, as a consequence, the necromancy that appears in the Munich Manual is an evolution of these theoretical understandings. It has been suggested that the authors of the manual knowingly designed the book to be in discord with holy law, and the main recipe employed throughout the manual used the same religious language and names of power alongside demonic names. An understanding of names of God derived from different holy texts, such as the Hebrew Torah and the Bible, required that the author of such of the rites that were written in the Munich Manual have at least a casual familiarity with these sources. So, in order for... Ooh, this is perfect. So in order for, whoever wrote that book describing these rituals was either widely educated, or was likely at least I would suggest, in my opinion, was probably an apprentice of someone of the clergy who was studying necromancy. And I think that's, I actually kind of think it's funny, to be honest. Of all things. Now, sorry guys, there's not too much else in the late Middle Ages or Renaissance that really changed about necromancy. But one thing I want to bring up and kind of talk about for a minute here, or just temporarily. So in the notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci, he makes the following statement: of all human opinions, that is to be reputed the most foolish which deals with belief in necromancy, the sister of alchemy, which gives birth to simple and natural things. Now, he both says, at least with my understanding of how this is written, and please, if you think of it differently, or you agree with me, or whatever, or you actually know what he's referring to, please let me know, because the way that I am interpreting this, he is both calling necromancy foolish, and a very foolish belief system, but then he also turns around and refers to it as the sister of alchemy. So he is both acknowledging that it is there and it has stemmed results, while also kind of stating that it's humbug in a way. So again, I think that's really interesting that he makes that reference that way. So I don't know, I just found it to be like super interesting. So before just gonna root and shoot our way here. Oh, you're the one in the back. Just kind of running and gunning here, hoping for the best. So, moving into modern era. So, necromancy as we see it today. Still a thing, guys. Still practiced. Still very much alive in modern times. Now, I'm not going to say one way or the other whether you guys should go out and practice necromancy or if you should just leave it alone. That is up for you guys to decide. If you guys are gung-ho and want to become necromancers, all I ask is please, one, leave me out of it, and two, try to practice safely if you are into that kind of thing. I have totally just torn them apart. I was not expecting this to be that easy. Now, in present necromancy, though, necromancy is actually more, in general, used as a term to describe the pretense of manipulation of death and the dead. Often facilitated through the use of magic, magical rites, and other kind of occult ceremonies. Things like contemporary seances, channeling, and spiritualism verge on necromancy when supposedly invoked spirits are asked to reveal future events or secret information. Now, one little fun fact about modern day necromancy, to an extent here, is that so in Chicago, which is actually where my spouse is from. So that's why I really like this little fun fact for you guys. So, because of their themes of spirit contact, the long-running show known as Supernatural Chicago and the annual Harry Houdini Seance, both of which are held at the Excalibur nightclub in Chicago, Illinois. Actually, both of these shows dubbed their lead performer, Mr. Neil Tobin, as a necromancer. So I thought that was a little fun fact. So if you guys are ever in Chicago for either of those things, just know that Neil Tobin is apparently a necromancer days. Or at least that's how he is referred to. Yeah, I totally just went through this like it was nobody's business. So, now, there's really not much else about modern, other than it's becoming more of a pop culture thing. I mean, the art of necromancy is referred to more as a universal usage kind of type of thing. There's a variety of differences in opinion about modern necromancy and the adepts who perform it, in terms of the exact methods to properly pursue the art. Now, in most cases here, people reference when the differing opinions that they mention the difference about how people practice now and how it was practiced in the medieval times and Middle Ages. Yeah, but that would be a huge topic for another day for me to kind of get into the details of that stuff, and I would have to look up I would have to go back through a lot of my reference materials and stuff and make a whole new note for that, because I have no real notes for that. So, in fact, that was about to end here. Just on its own. Those crew tours just totally tore stuff apart. Now, in pop culture, I'm going to bring this up now before we end this episode, because this is where we're going to pick up with it in the next part 2 episode. So, in pop culture, necromancy appears in many works of course, fantasy fiction. Unfortunately, I'm saying unfortunately, in my opinion, unfortunately, they come up as villains who use to raise armies of zombies that heroes must slay. Necromancy, of course, is a very popular plot point in games such as Diablo, The Elder Scrolls, Oblivion, and Skyrim, being the 2 biggest references. There's also a big thing in World of Warcraft, the Gothic Collection, as well as Mortal Kombat. It's also very prevalent in various tabletop games such as Dungeons & Dragons, and has been a big function in filming, in the film industry, most notably with the 1992 classic Army of Darkness. Now, there's a lot of things, with gaming and stuff that necromancy comes into play, and there's a lot of taboos because of this history. Come the Middle Ages, the Christian Church said no, which is where we get this taboo and get this creation of necromancers as villains in modern day. But I will talk more about that in the next episode, where I talk about necromancy in gaming. I'll talk about it, and I'll talk about the taboo, and I'll link some of this history stuff with that to explain it, as well as kind of just talk about the flavor of necromancy for you game creators out there. So that way, if you aren't familiar with necromancy in the gaming industry, through playing, if you haven't played any of those games, one, you must be new to the gaming industry, or you've never really played a video game before, or even a tabletop game for that matter. Which there's nothing wrong with that. If you were just getting into it and you're watching this episode to learn more about necromancy, awesome. More power to you guys. Fully support you. I hope my information helps you out. So, yeah, I'm going to stop rambling before I get too further in here. Now, let's see here. It is time for our songs for our playlist, guys. So, for our Nerd Collective playlist, let's see. Sorry, guys. Still kind of dying down from this cold stuff here. No, I can't do that one. Not yet. Let's see. Here we go. So for the Nerd Collective playlist, our song that we are picking is called is known as Human Beatbox by Fat Boys. So that is going to be our song for our eclectic playlist, let's see, beat. Just trying to pull it up on Spotify here. There we go. Alright. As for our song of the day, song of the day, let's see. So many good choices. We're gonna do another Leo one, because unfortunately a lot of my songs are Leo. Ooh. You know what, just for the fun of it, because it's one of my favorite songs. We're gonna go with Leo's cover of Gangnam Style. So that will be our song of the day. Yeah, song of the day. Yeah. I did the check twice, guys. So, if you guys have liked this video, hit that like button. Once again, it is part 1 of this Necromancy series that I'm doing, which I'll be adding into a playlist for... I don't know, I need to think of a name. So, before I put the playlist together, guys, I need a name for the playlist. So, I'm going to be putting all of my videos like this, where I'm sharing ideas and thoughts and history and information for all of you content creators out there, whether you be a DM, independent game maker, storyteller, writer, author, whatever you may be. If this information helps you, I want a playlist to put it there. Now, I was thinking something a little more serious, like game crafting or game theory or something like that. But I didn't really think that it would be best. I'm BeardBrigade. I gotta go with a beard theme. So I was almost thinking like beardcraft or beard theory, but then I almost feel like that I'm trying to push like a hair care product. So if you guys have any clever names, I will totally give you a huge shout out if I pick it and I like the one that you give me. If I don't think of one first, so leave me some comments, guys, of what you think I should call this playlist when I put it together of these videos. Because I want to get all the Necromancy videos up, and then I'm going to do wait for some feedback before I do another kind of video series like this one, because I want to just keep them all in one place for you guys. That way you guys can just reference that playlist or just all kinds of stuff. So anyways, thank you so much as always for tuning into my episodes, and hit that like button if you haven't already for me. If you've enjoyed this video, if you are looking forward to part 2 of this, learning about necromancy in gaming, and talking a little bit about that with me, hit that subscribe button and then hit that bell. I have not been telling people to hit the bell because I totally did not realize that was a thing until recently. So hit that bell so that when YouTube notifies you the next time a video is up. And with that, guys, thank you so much as always, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and you guys take care.